Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. It is early July, which means it's time to hit the books and start doing some research in terms of how we're going to draft our fantasy teams. I've been at it for a few weeks now because I'm a weirdo, but if you haven't started yet, this is probably the month where you should start at least reading some articles here and there. And today I wanted to share with you just a strategy that I'm going to try this year. It's not something that I've super refined or anything like that, but what I noticed was that some people in fantasy football, they put a lot of emphasis on the schedules, and I think some other people don't put as much emphasis on them. And I am one of those people that I think in the past I haven't worried too much about the schedules just because defenses change year over year and all that stuff. But this year I wanted to put a little more emphasis on it because going into this season, I thought, what is the one thing that happens to my teams that drives me crazy? And the one thing I came up with is when you go to set your lineup and one of your players faces a team or a defense that you just have real concerns whether they're going to be able to move the ball, and you start considering bench players. Even if it's a player that you like a lot, you might consider bench players because they're playing the Rams or whatever. That was something that I wanted to put an emphasis on this year to avoid. And I also wanted to put some emphasis on good matchups as well, where I think teams could really light it up in a given week. But the emphasis was mostly on the bad matchups and avoiding those if we could. And, a few players get bumped up or bumped down just depending on how these rankings shake out. And this is not a super serious algorithm or formula. This is not a model that I'm trying to sell to anyone. This is just some back of the napkin math that I do. And I'll just put a brief description of it on the screen here. Basically, I just pick the 6 or 7 defenses, or whatever the number may be, where if a player is going up against that defense, I have real concerns whether the team is going to get stuck in the mud trying to move the ball, or they're going to get behind early and that will affect the running game, or something like that, where there's just potential for this defense to simply torpedo your week for a player that you're relying on. And to avoid those matchups as best we could. And like I said, I did put some emphasis on the good matchups, but a good or average matchup still dictates that you're probably going to be able to move the ball. So the super terrible matchups that you dread are the ones that I wanted to focus on and maybe try to avoid if it came down to a tiebreaker. So this is what I came up with, and really what I did was, I'm not going to get into the brass tacks, but really all I did was add up matchups I thought were really bad and matchups I thought were very good, and put those in a blender, added a couple other factors in there, and here's my rankings. And as you can see here, the Falcons and the Saints have by far the best schedules, the Vikings and Browns and Titans as well, followed by the Eagles, Lions, and Bengals. And then at the bottom of the list, as far as bad schedules that I want to try to possibly avoid, we have the Cardinals. Much has been made about their terrible schedule. The 49ers and also the Raiders. So this doesn't mean that I'm out on all players from all these teams, but it means that I'm probably going to be avoiding them with some exceptions. The teams in green, it's kind of all systems go. You have to adjust for a little bit for the fact that some of these are not very good offenses, but you can take advantage of that too, right? So I'm looking at a team like the Browns and the Titans, and the Browns and the Titans don't have very many difficult matchups. So what that tells me is that those teams are going to at least have a chance to move the ball. If you believe in players on these offenses, then you're going to have a chance to draft them with confidence. You don't have anything to worry about as far as the schedule biting you, because if you believe in a player and you think they might be in a position to succeed, these schedules will bolster that assertion. So you have a player that you like. On top of that, even though they have some question marks, they have a really positive schedule. So that means that you might be able to get a Quinshon Judkins a little later or a Harold Fannin, and you're really excited about that because you know that the Browns are probably going to, as bad as they can be on offense, they're probably going to move the ball consistently all year. Titans, kind of similar. You're still concerned, but they should be able to move the ball all year. The Vikings are a team where you might be able to find some value because this is another team that nobody really wants to draft from. But by my calculations, they have about one difficult matchup this year where I'm afraid they might get not shut out, but might have some problems scoring points. So, and I calculated about 7 great matchups for them. So that means if you believe in Kyler or Justin Jefferson, you might be able to get them later than you might think. You might be able to get Justin Jefferson at the 12th or 13th or 14th pick because everybody's soured on this team, but you know that they have a great schedule. The Saints and the Falcons are teams that I think people are pretty high on the Saints anyways, so I don't think you're going to get much of a discount there. The Falcons, Bijan and Drake London, these are all players that we kind of know are going to go high. You might be able to get some value with Kyle Pitts, but he's kind of on everyone's radar now too. So even though those teams have, by my calculations, the best schedules for fantasy, I don't think you're going to get much of a discount on their players, except for maybe some tertiary guys like Jawan Johnson or Zachariah Branch or something like that, Brian Robinson. But the Vikings, Browns, and Titans represent teams where you might be able to get value from teams that just people tend to shy away from in fantasy drafts. And then finally, the Eagles, Lions, and Bengals. These are teams that people love drafting from anyways. The Eagles, people I think have soured on a little bit. However, this is a great time to buy the Eagles. They still have a great offensive line, and they have a really good schedule, and they still got a lot of primetime players on that offense. So you can buy them with confidence. Same with the Lions. And the Lions are a good team for me to note that this doesn't factor in everything I could possibly think of. Like the Lions, by my calculations, they technically have the 7th best schedule. However, I only think they have one really tough matchup, and this is another one of those years where the Lions play like 12 games under a dome. So, which is always gold for Jared Goff and the Lions. So, this is a team where even though they're the 7th best schedule, you could argue they have a top 3 schedule just because of the indoor games. The Lions do have an international game, which I counted, and 11 different teams have international games this year. And you might want to factor that in a little bit, but that's another thing that I didn't really consider because so many teams are going overseas to play now that I don't want to get too caught up in those games and penalizing teams that have to go play those games. They're always very random outcomes in my opinion, but even still, there's so many teams that have to do it that I'm not really factoring that in. If you want to check out teams that don't have any international games and want to give them a slight bump, you could possibly do that. I have a team where it's the Jaguars because they play twice in Europe this year. They play 2 weeks in a row, so they're not going to travel too much more than any other team. But I have the Jaguars. They just missed the cut for bad schedules. They have a pretty rough schedule. And then when you add in the fact that they play 2 games overseas, it kind of makes it even dicier. So I could have put the Jaguars in that bad category with the Cardinals, the Niners, and the Raiders, but I decided not to just because I'm balancing out for the fact that I'm generally high on the Jags offense this year. So those are just some examples of how this model, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't factor in everything. And it's a good lesson because a lot of people are trying to shove models in your face and algorithms and advanced stats. Nothing shows the full context. Nothing is going to tell you everything you need to know. It doesn't matter how many stats you compile and put together. We're just taking our best guess here. And this is just a guess that I'm going to try this year to see if my teams perform a little better. Now, you may also have noticed that these lists are pretty short. Like I didn't split one half of the league into good schedules and one half into bad schedules, or I didn't have like 10 good schedules and 10 bad ones. I didn't try to force it. One thing I didn't want to do, again, you don't want to get, in my opinion, you don't want to get too caught up in one stat or one way of doing things. So I didn't want to overemphasize the schedule when, again, things can change. Teams get different personnel every year. defenses dip and rise up every year, so we don't want to rely on the schedule too much. Therefore, I think 21 teams are not a part of this exercise. That just means that I didn't find their schedules to be terrible or great. They have a decent mix of good and difficult matchups. And, if you want to do your own list and rate your own matchups on defense for each team in fantasy, then you might have a few more teams, good and bad, than I do. But I just wanted to focus on the teams where their schedules really popped out at me. And these are the ones I have here. Let's go to the bad teams and talk about them. As I talked about at the top, a lot of people have mentioned the Cardinals' schedule. It's really, really bad. I count 7 defensive matchups that I just don't really want any part of. This is exacerbated by the fact that the Cardinals play in a division with the Seahawks and the Rams, and those are 2 teams that were no-brainers for me to have on my list of defenses I wanted to avoid. So there's 4 bad matchups for the Cardinals and the Niners for that matter. And the Cardinals have some good matchups too. I'm not fading Trey McBride because of this. The only reason I might fade Trey McBride is if Jacoby Brissett doesn't sign and Carson Beck plays. That's the only way I would take down Trey McBride. Marvin Harrison, I'm not really too interested in, but I will take him as a third wide receiver if I need him. Brock Bowers, it's kind of the same thing with McBride, where I can't really fade them because they're too good. But I am aware of the fact that it might bite me, and I don't want to be too aggressive. I want to take them where I'm comfortable taking them, but I don't want to get into the mid-second round and I'm like tempted to take a stud tight end because I don't think the return is going to be quite worth that this year. And then we have the Niners for our final team that I dinged for a bad schedule. Again, this is a little bit of a symptom of being in a division with the Seahawks and the Rams, but nonetheless, this is a team that has like an okay offensive line and question marks on defense. They have a lot of players on offense that I could see missing time with injuries, and I'm just worried they get a little bit behind the 8 ball. This is a case where I kind of still want these players because of the offense that they're in. Whereas the Cardinals and the Raiders, I really worry about. I don't necessarily think they have bad coaches, but I don't think they have Kyle Shanahan that's been there forever and has exactly the players that he wants playing in exactly the places he wants. So I'm willing to forgive the Niners a little bit for a tough schedule. I think they're used to it. I think this team's been through a lot of wars. It's just I do think they have some warts on offense. Particularly the offensive line and defense. McCaffrey has faded as a runner this past year. I think they're still going to give him the ball a lot, but it might be tougher sledding than it's been in other years for him. I like the receivers and George Kittle for the right price since he's coming back from that Achilles. So I'm willing to kind of forget that the Niners have a terrible schedule if a player that I like on their team is at the top of my list and it's my turn to pick. However, if I'm breaking ties, I'm definitely fading Niners players over others that might have an easier path. So that's my little schedule experiment that I'm trying this year. You can do the same if you haven't paid attention to the schedule as much as you would have liked in recent years and you want to try something like this. Just do some back of the napkin math. Just put some numbers together that you're comfortable with that look good to you and find out who has good and bad schedules that you might want to embrace or avoid.